Hello, hello, hello. This is Danny Ceballos with the Best Boss Podcast. Welcome, dear listener. So excited to have you here. We are going to be speaking with a favorite friend, colleague, expert, sage, wise woman, Lindsay McKinnon, about the importance of resilience, both for you. If you are a leader of leaders, this is important for you. It's also important for you to understand, to absorb some of the things that, everything that Lindsay is going to be sharing with us so that you can best lead and manage your leaders and managers and pass down the wisdom to them. So, Lindsay, just say hello so everybody can hear your voice. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello, hello. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Danny, for the invitation.
Are you kidding? The honor is all mine. Thrilled to have you here. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Lindsay, and then we will get right into it. Lindsay McKinnon offers guidance as a trauma-informed, integrative somatic healing and resiliency coach. Working with individuals and groups, she possesses a passion for helping people explore and harness their unique and deeply spiritual mind-body connection. Lindsay offers both wisdom to soothe the aching soul and empowerment to take action in our lives and communities because of what we have been through. She teaches leaders how to shed light on the fact that when met with open compassion, courage, and willingness, our greatest obstacles can become our greatest teachers, and even playgrounds to restore our playfulness and joy of living. Lindsay teaches that we are made better for rising to such challenges, and therefore, entire communities and organizations are impacted in positive ways when we show up as our full, authentic selves. God, I love that bio. Love reading that.
Oh,
Love reading that. And Lindsay, of course, we're going to be speaking pretty specifically. I know you work with clients all over the board, but we're going to be speaking specifically about what do leaders and the leaders of leaders need to really understand about resilience. So I'm wondering, before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit more what's not in your bio? What's anything more to your story or your resiliency story or the work that you do that would be helpful to start us off?
sure. Goodness. My resiliency is three different things. It is a characteristic trait. It is a process, and it is also a result.
I love that.
And so when we're talking about resiliency, there's lots of different ways that we can talk about resiliency. Some people are resilient because of a diagnosis that they have come through. Some people are resilient from a body injury. Some people are resilient from a trauma that they have had to navigate. And some people, entire cultures are resilient. So it's important to understand what kind of resiliency we're talking about, right?
Okay.
And here we're talking about kind of the culture of organization, right?
Yes, indeed.
Right. Yeah. So my personal experience in resiliency, I think it started a long time ago as an athlete and just having injuries growing up and having to rehabilitate myself through those injuries. I then became a massage and body worker and working with clients one-on-one, helping them in their body space to become more resilient, more flexible. Another definition for resiliency that I love is that it means flexible strength, right? The kind of strength that is willing to bend and is willing to create more capacity in and within itself. I digress.
From a place of strength, right? I think that was super important, right? From a
From a
place of strength.
place of strength, yeah. And sometimes that strength is not a physical strength. Sometimes that strength is not a powerful, like, push that comes from adrenaline. Sometimes that strength is a willingness to surrender and just be open to the process of becoming resilient,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
And that is quite
Yeah,
often even harder to do,
yeah,
especially in our Northern American culture,
yes, yes,
right?
yes. And I think my listeners will really relate to that, right? So my listeners tend to be go-getters, right? I mean, that's why they're in the positions that they are, is to make things happen. Yeah. So far, everything that you've said, I think requires us to slow down anyway, you can flesh that out a bit more. Yeah, how do folks kind of work with that?
Well, the way that I worked with it in my personal experience, just to dip in a little bit deeper,
Yeah,
7 years ago, I had a huge capital T trauma. And in one night, now at this point, I was living the best life. I had a great family and a great house and a great job. My massage studio was in my home. And one night, 7.5 years ago, we had a total house fire and we lost everything in hours. I literally walked out and into the ambulance without any shoes, um, with nothing to my name and no material goods to even point to my history or my identity. And that night, I also lost my two children, Patrick and Logan. Patrick was 10 years old and Logan was 10. Logan was 5. So through that process, landing in the emergency department in my local hometown, and then transferred to the burn unit at the town that I grew up in, which was crazy. Um, Resiliency took on a whole new path for me, right? So
yeah,
I really had to access everything that I could in order to heal myself. I was so supported by communities and by doctors of all kinds and family. And so I really leaned into those relationships. I also leaned into what I already knew about the body and the deep
right.
wisdom of the body. And that's why I was led to study the neuroscience of somatics and why and how it's so healing, especially for trauma and memory. And so we're talking about leaders and managers, right? Um, and back in this past March, I was honored, deeply honored, to be able to lead the senior leadership team of our emergency department in a day long retreat. Now, 7.5 years ago, I was their patient. And I knew that night when I landed in the hospital that I was going to pay this forward and I was going to pay it forward in big ways. And that this was going to become my mission. And that's why I went to go get my coaching certification and to study neuroscience, understand polyvagal theory, and how the brain is wired for memory and traumatic memory, and then how to hack into that so that you can rewire the brain and create a new behavior and therefore a new result,
Yeah,
right?
love that.
Even when you're triggered.
Mm-hmm.
So, as managers and leaders of leaders, we need to understand these things because the people that we manage and oversee and are leading, they have their own traumas and they have their own triggers. And yet, we can only lead them through what we have already owned for ourselves, right? So, we need
Mm-hmm.
to have some kind of working knowledge of our own traumas and our own memories in order to manage them, in order to regulate our nervous system and stay grounded in the present moment in order to make clear decisions on behalf of our team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm going all over the place.
No, you're doing really well, and I'll get in there and ask questions if you want, or we'll just keep going. So that is so. First of all, thank you for sharing your story, and yes, it's such a major trauma. It still
Yeah.
blows my mind. Um, what can folks do to so your trauma terrible and uncommon. But we've all had some kind of trauma, right? But big T, little T. So, what can managers and leaders, busy people, professionals, do to get in touch with that? If what you're saying is true, which I believe is true, that we have to know before we can work with others, we have to know our own. What can people do to start exploring that? Is it something they can do on their own?
Well, we start in baby steps, right? So, before we started the recording, I was talking about titration and pendulation. So what that means is even being willing to go there, because until you're willing to go there, until you're willing to look at something, it's just going to keep rearing its ugly head, and it'll come out at the seams
Mm-hmm.
in our relationships, in leaving work and going home, or even in our working relationships, whether we have 9 to 5s or working remotely, right? So noticing and allowing and giving things permission. So what I mean by that is when we're triggered, when we go to that fight, flight, or freeze state, to just understand, like take a step out of your head and get into your body, be like, oh, what's going on here? Why am I here? How did I get here? Oh, she said this and that triggered this kind of response in me. And just
Mm-hmm.
noticing that is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Noticing where you're feeling it. Are you feeling it in your chest? Are you feeling it in your throat? Are you feeling it in your stomach? Are your feet and your quads tensing like you're about to take off in flight, literally? And allowing it to be there. When we don't allow these physical sensations to bubble up, we're depressing them. And that's literally where depression comes from, right? We're looking in the past.
Well, that's interesting.
We're
Huh.
bringing some stuff up, maybe from our past, maybe from our attachment, okay? And from the original incidents. Allow them to be there and give them permission to be there, because those responses are valid. They're there for a reason, because they protected us for very good reasons at a certain point in time.
Mm-hmm.
They might not be valid right now in this
Mm-hmm.
new situation, but it's on autopilot,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can
Mm-hmm.
learn somatic tools. There's simple breath work tools, the box breathing, breathe in, deep inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. Simple box breath. And I always recommend doing that box breath while touching something. Make it tactile, like whether it's, the wall that is holding you up, and just tracing with your finger, or even your fingerprint, a finger on a thumb, just like this. Breathe in for 4 seconds, 2, 3, 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. So you can literally do that in the middle of a meeting. No one's going to know what you're doing, right? Even if you're on Zoom. But what
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing is I'm regulating myself so that I can be present. Okay. Box
Mm-hmm.
breath is a very easy one. Tapping, I would recommend stepping into a bathroom or turning your back and into a corner of your office or something and just tapping the top of your head. I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling anxious. It's okay to be anxious. I know I'm anxious in this moment because, and then tapping third eye. I can take agency over myself, over my body in this moment. I have the strength and the presence and the wherewithal to manage, to take agency, to ground myself, to calm, and then tapping here. And tapping is another beautiful somatic experience
Huh. Huh.
approach. And you can tap your shoulder blades and tap your heart and then tap the edges, the spine of your hands.
Hmm.
And that tapping can take you from an extreme anxious state back into a grounded state.
Interesting. Huh.
So having a toolkit of somatic practices, um, employing them, applying them, using them, and then noticing, did that work for me?
Hmm.
Like, how did it just shift my experience? Do I feel grounded? And then if it did, continue with that tool. If it didn't, grab a different tool.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's shaking, body scanning. And so I'm so sorry. It's 3:33.
Hmm.
So learning somatic approaches to regulate your nervous system so that you can show up as your full, authentic, present self
Mm-hmm.
and lead with clarity, because
mhm,
you're actually
mhm,
willing to do that. You're
mhm,
willing to
mhm,
take on your own stories and see how you can reframe them,
mhm,
to see how you
mhm.
can be resilient in spite of them.
So I'm getting a little disconnect. So there's
Okay.
the practice of box breathing, of tapping, of other somatic tools. We started off talking about identifying and working with your trauma. And then we segued into the tools for managing yourself, managing your. So, can I do that without getting in touch with my trauma?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the reasons why I love somatic coaching, is because when you're working, thank you for that question. It's such a perfect and strong question because, um, you know, going into the depths of your trauma, you probably need a therapist. You need a licensed professional counselor. Somatic coaching and using somatic tools, you can be anybody. It's just taking a practice, and by using the tool, you are
Mhm,
in effect rewiring your brain,
mhm, mhm,
okay? So
mhm.
that you can lead from a place of being grounded and
I
being
love that.
centered and being fully aware and ready for whatever your team has coming at you.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
it's a
mhm,
matter of being aware enough that, yeah, there's some trauma there. There's some stuff that this is bringing up. I need to tend to it. I might need to look for a therapist. For right now, what I can do is a little box breathing, a little shaking, a little tapping,
mhm,
so I
mhm,
can ground myself and be the leader that I am called to be in this moment right now
mhm,
with these
mhm.
people right here.
Yeah, I love that.
So,
I love it.
yeah.
So I'm an actor, right? I've been doing a lot of community theater lately since
Yeah.
I relocated back to New York. We're opening tomorrow night, so we have our final dress rehearsal tonight, and I'm a nervous wreck. I'm a nervous wreck about the whole thing. So I'm already envisioning. I've already done a little bit of try to do some breathing backstage before I go out in one of my three characters, which makes it a little bit more stressful. And I'm grateful and I love it and all that, and I'm super excited and I yeah. So I'm really excited now to do box breathing and some tapping before I go out on stage. I
Yeah.
think that'll be helpful. So is it? But is do you think that every time that we experience anxiety or that we use these tools, that it comes from trauma? And is it important to understand that? And yeah.
Not all the time, but we do have, like, from our past, from our childhood, we have certain things that were set in motion that we go into an autopilot reaction
Yeah, I think
from.
that's okay. All right, I think I owe you money for this therapy session because I actually think so. For me, I've been just toying around with this idea. I can't believe I'm saying so. Many years ago, when I was a kid, I was a magician, right? I did a lot of magic. I was Dazzling Dan, the Magic Man, and I was doing in schools and camps and you know elderly facilities, nursing homes. And there was a couple of traumatic times and I actually keep thinking about it. I'm wondering, like, is that part of my? There's something that's unbelievably nerve wracking about even in the professional work that I did that I've always been like, why am I so? So I'm starting to think that maybe I need to do a little bit of work around that to help because it seems to me that by no matter what the somatic tool is that you have, if you know at least a little bit about where it's coming from, the tool will be that much more effective.
Yeah, and the tool is just effective,
If
period.
the tool is just effective, period. Okay.
Yeah.
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 Okay. All right.
Because somatic, that whole word comes from the root word soma. And soma is a Greek word that means the wisdom, coming from the wisdom of the body. So, one of the things that I learned when I started learning about the neuroscience of all this stuff is that um, through the vagus nerve, that is the largest cranial nerve in our bodies, it goes from our brains to the rest of our bodies. It literally touches every single organ. 20% of the data is running from our analytical mind. This is really important for managers. 20% is running from our analytical cognitive mind, telling our bodies messages of safety, messages of connection, and messages of healing, and therefore capacity for resiliency, right?
Okay.
So if we are in talk therapy situations with a therapist, that's wonderful. I love my therapist. I've had many over the years. And because we are talking, retelling the story over and over again, we are scratching the surface 20%. That's it. We're leaving 80% of the messages of safety, connection, and healing, and therefore the capacity to be resilient. 80% of it we're leaving on the table. And that is if we have a therapist, if we're privileged enough to have a therapist, right?
Right. Right.
80% of the work is in our bodies. It's
Uh,
doing body work.
I see.
80%. That's why when we're walking down a street by ourselves and we see someone that feels a little sketchy, our bodies know to cross to the other side of the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our
Mm-hmm.
bodies know, our bodies
Mm-hmm.
have wisdom that tells our brain what to do and how to behave and how to react. So when we go to our bodies without even unhashing the trauma stories or whatever it is, we heal that much faster. We
When we go
experience
to our bodies,
capacity.
okay, okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting. Because I'm thinking, immediately what comes up for me when I think about when, your example, and it's a great example, but seeing somebody that's sketchy crossing that also kind of, for me, brings up the possibility of unconscious bias and a whole bunch of things where our body is not being very reasonable with us because it's
Mhm.
playing into, I guess, the trauma of whatever, of racism, sexism, classism,
Mhm.
so, but I guess I'm also hearing by doing the work, we can start to recognize, I guess I'm saying our body isn't always giving us the right messages, telling
Mhm.
us to flee, telling us to fight, not always the right thing.
I don't know. I trust my body way more than my brain.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Which I think is another reason why me personally in my trauma's healing story,
Yeah.
it's why I was able to heal so much
Sure.
quicker. I was
Yeah.
already a massage therapist for over 20 years. I was already doing breath work. I was a childbirth doula at the time. So I was teaching women how to relax into the most painful parts of our lives and how to relax into the pain points so that you can literally have more space to grow, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and using somatic tools to change how your brain relates to pain, right?
Yeah.
Physical pain, that is.
Yeah.
So, and it was a beautiful thing to be able to teach the senior leadership team at the emergency department somatic tools that they're not taught in med school.
Mm-hmm.
And here
Mm-hmm.
they are leading an entire department through a global pandemic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they're scared, and rightfully so. And
Mm-hmm.
how to work with them, how to equip them with new coping mechanisms and skills where you might not need a therapist in that moment, but you need a tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need a tool so that you can lead and guide and make a clear decision that is actually, life changing for someone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm trying to connect the dots with that. So there's that example that I just shared that we just talked about. Seeing the stranger across the on the same side of the street and crossing the street is so maybe it's that 20. So there's still the 20%, right? The 20% cognitive
Yeah.
that works with the body in its response,
Hmm.
right? Sometimes rightfully so, sometimes not, right, maybe that's part of it, right? So there's this cognitive patterning that forms unconscious bias that's still 20% of our response. And I don't know, what do you think? You know what I'm saying? Because it's again, I maintain that,
It could be. It's the
right?
same way. It's called neuroception. It's the same way how you can walk into a room and know that the people in the room were just talking about you.
Mm,
Like
mm,
you literally have these feelers that are
mm.
out everywhere that's giving you information.
So how do you? So I'm wondering, and maybe this is next level conversation, but how do you? Can you test those? Is it important? I guess I'm always telling clients the importance of, start with your gut, but get the data to support it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
And the data is not only what you're feeling and knowing and acknowledging in your own experience, but also by engaging a different level of conversation with whoever is in front of you. Maybe it's
Yeah.
the person that you're managing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a colleague. Maybe it's a family member.
Right.
But hey, this is what I'm noticing. Can we have a different kind of conversation? What do you need
Yeah.
more of? What do
Yeah.
you need less of? How can I be helpful here?
Hmm.
Right? Where can we meet in the middle here?
Hmm. Hmm.
Right?
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. And thank you for taking us back to, what we need to for leaders and managers. And I'm still stuck on and now I'm thinking, yeah, so, this, how important it is for leaders and managers and for somebody walking on the street and seeing somebody that's sketchy is to tamp down perhaps the primary limbic response to engage the deeper wiser part of ourself, and the limbic response is the first response, which is, I think, in the parlance that we're talking, it's fight, flight. It's those responses, and it's important that to gather the data at some point. You can't do that in the moment, but to at least slow the f down, right? Just slow that down
Slow
a little
it down, yes, because what you're talking about, what you're tapping into right now, Danny, is the difference between a physiological response that you feel, a sensation that you feel, and the story that you're making up to go
bit.
along
Yeah,
with that sensation,
there we go. That's it.
right?
Yes,
That's the
yes,
key. That's the
yeah.
golden nugget. And that's where you use the somatic tool to rewire your brain.
I
Because
love that.
sometimes the story, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes the story is not accurate,
Right,
right?
right. Or helpful. Yep.
Right. We
Hmm.
feel sensations. We have emotions. By the way, emotions only last 90 seconds.
Mm,
After
mm.
that, they're a story that we retell ourselves over
Oh,
and over
that's
and over
it.
again.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, this was amazing. Amazing, amazing, amazing. I think there are so many nuggets of gold in terms of wisdom that you shared, but also some really practical strategies and tools that leaders and leaders of leaders can do right now, right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, is there something that you would say is like, as soon as you hang up this podcast, think about this, do this?
I always say go to the breath. And the reason why I say that is that it's the first thing that we literally had to learn how to do. When we came out of our mother's womb, we were faced with temperature changes. We were faced with light. We were faced with sensation on our skin that we've never felt before. We were faced with sounds. And we had to open our lungs, which is actually really painful for little babies, little newborns. That first
Interesting.
breath, which is why they cry. You know, the first thing we have to learn in life is how to breathe. The first thing that we need to do when we feel triggered in any kind of a way is relearn how to breathe right there. Take care of yourself in that moment. Take
And
care of
box
yourself.
breathing is a pretty good tool, huh? Box breathing, it's simple to understand.
There's so many different kinds of breathing. Alternate nose breathing is great
Yeah,
too. And
right.
that
I've done,
gives
yeah.
you a lot of energy as
Mm-hmm.
well. But to start researching the different kinds of breathing, it can take a 30-second little interval here, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or it can take
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes. If you have
Mm-hmm.
15 minutes, awesome, go meditate. And it doesn't have to be sitting in a chair and chanting Om, which is beautiful. That's a whole nother somatic tool, using your voice to vocalize Vu, Om. It's a vibrational tool. It's a
Mm-hmm.
somatic tool. It
Mm-hmm.
calms your entire body down.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
but find one that, right? Everybody, it seems to me, everybody, there's a bunch out there. We heard a bunch. Yeah. To at least
Yeah.
get moved to that little step. Yeah.
And the trick is just reaching for any tool, right? The hardest part is reaching for a tool. It doesn't matter which tool they're reaching for,
Mm-hmm.
as long as they're reaching for something. Because if it doesn't work, then they know that they have the capacity to even reach in the first place, and we can reach again,
That's
right?
true. That's very true.
And
Love
we
that.
just keep reaching until we find the tool or the combination, the perfect recipe that works for us in that moment. And what got us here won't get us there. So sometimes we have to learn new tools, new approaches,
Mm-hmm.
new methods and techniques.
Lindsay, for folks that want to stay in your universe,
Yeah.
is there a way to, what's the best way of reaching or getting in touch with you? And is there anything else that you can share with us in terms of your wisdom and
Yeah.
tools?
Thank you for asking. I'd love for people to reach out to me through my website, www.soulbodyconnect.com. And I also, on my website, have a free downloadable. It's called Your Resiliency Toolkit. And this is a proven pathway for healing. It's made to help people reduce stress and overwhelm, teach them how to relax their nervous system and reclaim their life, reclaim the capacity for their vibrancy, reclaim their purpose, and reclaim your birthright, which is joy. That's the spot that we're meant to live in.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah.
Love that. All right, Lindsay. Well, listen, thank you so much. I know we'll stay in contact. Just love talking to you, love hearing, and I know my listeners do too. So thank you so much, Lindsay.
I
It's been a pleasure.
appreciate it. Thank you, Danny. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Everybody, thank you again for joining us on the Best Boss podcast. This is Danny Ceballos. We'll see and hear you next time. Bye now.